Exeter over in France. Awesome.
Hi, Tim.
Hello, crew online. Uh, welcome. I'm going to say welcome back, right? Because we put this session on because our last seminar? It was only a couple of weeks ago, generated a lot of buzz. Thank you, audience, around the collective heroic efforts on our global tipping points report. And it felt from the vibe in the chat last time around that there was appetite to keep talking about this stuff, talking about what more and different and we might do together in future. So I don't want to repeat a load of stuff we already, or the crew already went over last time, but let me just check. I'm going to check in the room and then I'm going to check online. So in the room, who did everybody already come to the last seminar about the tipping points report? Just stick your hand up if you did. Good. Or anyone who didn't, because this is going to determine whether I say a tiny bit. Okay, so we've got a few people in the room who didn't come last time, which might persuade me to spend a few minutes talking about the tipping points report. Online folks, if you want to stick the camera on or whatever, great to see you. I'm looking at you on my screen. Hands up, did you all come to the seminar last time? So we don't need to waste our time on that. Yeah, lots of thumbs up. Is there anyone who didn't, yeah, no? Okay. So everybody, good to see you all. Well, I'll just run very briefly through a bit about what our tipping points report was about, especially for the benefit for those who didn't make it last time. But our aim really with this hour is mostly to have time for discussion, reflection, inputs, because we've done this one global tipping points report at COP28, but it's part of a process, and we have every intention of trying to keep updating the world on both the bad tipping points in the Earth system and the positive tipping point opportunities to try and avoid the bad tipping points. And from my personal view, I'll say it would be just awesome to have a bigger community at Exeter and among friends beyond Exeter who want to chip into that. And that's why we wanted to give it some more time today. I'm just going to let Tim Foxon in on the thing. So very quickly, so we did this big report. It had some pretty straightforward headline recommendations. Surprise, surprise. You want to avoid bad tipping points in the Earth system, phase out fossil fuels and land use emissions now, or as fast as reasonably possible. We're not going to avoid all the bad tipping points, so we need to strengthen adaptation support and support for those suffering the losses and the damages that will come from the bad tipping points that cascade through the system and through societies. There's practical things that an international process that already exists can do to take on board knowledge of tipping points in what are called nationally determined contributions. That's what each government puts forward as its voluntary efforts to meet the Paris Agreement on climate change, and what's also called the global stocktake, the regular exercise of checking how are we doing? Are we actually doing what we need to be doing to get on top of this crisis? And then fairly straightforward, coordinate policy efforts to try and trigger what we call positive tipping points. The message is essentially it is a coordination problem at some level between different actors with different sort of agency or power or whatever language you want to use that can bring forward accelerating change. But it won't hurt if policy supports that. Let's put it that way. And we had a practical recommendation that actually global summit on tipping points wouldn't go amiss. And obviously, there's plenty of work to do to deepen knowledge on this stuff and translate it into action. The overarching message of the report was pretty straightforward. There isn't a business as usual future anymore, because if we carried on business as usual, we just go into the catastrophe, the unfolding bad tipping points of on the black path, I think it is in the picture here. Earth system tipping points then trigger sort of tipping points in their impacts on nature and Gaia and human societies. And then that starts cascading into all sorts of imaginable nasty things in socioeconomic impacts. So let's not go there. But we left it way too late to tackle climate nature crisis incrementally, we've got to accelerate progress radically. I mean, order of magnitude radically. That's why our the other side of the narrative is we have to have something that we call positive tipping points that can accelerate the change we need. So it was a big report. You might have looked at it, many of you now. There's 4 parts to it. The first 3 are kind of on the bad tipping points, and the fourth is on the good ones. And the logic on the bad ones is, right, let's map out what do we know about the bad Earth system tipping points. Then what do we know about how they would impact nature and people? So I'm just going to let Hallie in, unless someone else has. And then, hold on a minute, how do we govern, in light of that knowledge and those consequences, what can you do to govern the situation? Which, excuse me, and then we come to the positive tipping points. If you want a brief summary, quite a lot of science is already done in section 1. Very little, to be frank. Lots could be done in section 2, but very little is. And no one has thought about section 3 until Manana and the team started writing about it for the report. Section 4 on the positive tipping points, it's a mixed bag. There's some cool research going on, but there's a truckload more to do. I think I'm going to skip the recommendation slides. Sorry, Josh. There are a lot of recommendations and there's a lot of detail, but we're here to discuss. I'm just trying to capture the spirit. So maybe I'll briefly dwell on some follow-on activities just to bring everybody up to speed with what are we up to. So this whole process of writing a report was really a tacit way of building a community of people who are concerned and interested in this stuff, particularly a research community, but also like a translation and knowledge community. So there were like 200 and something authors of the report, but surely there are more hundreds of people out there who have got useful knowledge and ideas to bring to the table. So what are we up to? Well, we're busy kind of trying to hold that community, take it forward. On S1 just means section 1, I think. So on the Earth system tipping points, there is stuff going on, as the bullet point says, and we want to continue to develop our better knowledge of what could be the bad Earth system tipping points. How close are they? How can they interact? Could they cascade? And so on and so forth. Impacts, section 2, impacts of tipping points and cascades to like bad social tipping. The simple story there is I could say nobody really wants to fund it in my 10 or 15 year experience, and yet there's somebody must want to fund this because there's plenty of good work that can be done to actually like take a climate model, make it have a bad tipping point, and then start to see what the impacts are and play those through impacts models and so on. There's huge interest internationally in what's being loosely called systemic risk assessment, and bad tipping points and how they could cascade is a big part of that. So even if there hasn't been, for whatever reason, funding for that kind of work in the past, I'm guardedly confident that everybody is switching on to these risks, and therefore there will be resource to do more research on those. And as we mentioned in the bullet points, in my group with Josh, Chris, and some of the others, we've got a little bit of support to kind of to research these bad cascading tipping points. But I'm sure we think there's a huge opportunity space there for those who want to get in on that. There doesn't seem to be anything here on section 3, but I'll verbalize that on the governance of a system tipping points, working with Manana Milkerite, who leads on that, we're trying to connect with a whole bunch of researchers who are interested in that problem in simple terms. And there's a huge, like I said before, that's almost like everything is to be done. So that's cool. And on positive tipping points, we have some support from our core funders, the Bezos Earth Fund. Steve, Tom, Josh, who are all variously online or in the room, are busy working away on giving an update of where are different sectors of the economy, different countries, etc., at with respect to the possibility of positive tipping points and how close they are. We're trying to bring a stronger global south angle into all of this research. So Tom could speak to it, but as it says there's some work towards starting to build a database of cases of these things going on. And then we like to, I think, to focus the mind. We're thinking ahead. We're thinking, okay, we made a difference. We put this whacking great report out at COP28. What are the other moments or places where we could do some further outputs, products, whatever you want to call them, that could have an influence? So we are in a discussion with the people who host New York Climate Week, who are very excited about framing that this year around positive tipping points. So I'm sure we'll do something there. And we might bring some of our update on where's the world at with positive tipping points to New York Climate Week. COP29, Azerbaijan, it'll be smaller than the one in Dubai. It'll be the language that's being used, it'll be like the finance COP. But finance, moving money, as for whatever you think of it, is kind of important about making change. So our current thinking is for COP29, we want to do something on the intersection between bad Earth system tipping points and the fundamental issue of climate justice, or rather injustice. So what do tipping points mean for the injustices of climate change on the one hand, but what could also, how could, for example, positive tipping point to renewable energy be done in a way that was socially just and was actually reducing, empowering the global south, reducing inequalities, etc. So we haven't got much further than that, but that's our planned, what we're working towards. And then COP30 in Brazil a year later, that'll be a big one with Brazil hosting. And we plan to make a second iteration of this global tipping points report for COP30, or update the world basically on the bad and the good tipping points, and work with the Brazil hosts to hopefully make that more central, because there's obvious things for Brazil, like, can we stop the negative tipping of the Amazon and have a positive tipping point for the Amazon that they obviously get. Right, enough from me. I think, unless any of the rest of the crew who helped put the slides together want to say things. Don't know. We've already used that 15 minutes, so I'm going to shut up. Hopefully that was useful for the people who didn't see it first time around, and not too boring for the people who did. At which point Josh came up with a bunch of questions that we could leave up. But really we wanted to create a space now anyway for you to come and say, oh, I like this, or I don't like that, or I'm really interested in this and I'd like to be part of that. Because as usual with these things, whilst there might be some funding support, which is always a useful thing, a lot of this is the coalition of the willing and the people who are sort of passionate about this way of thinking, and maybe this could move the dial and maybe this can have an influence. So I shut up at that point. I invite online digital hands up, or wave your hand. I'll try and keep a look at the screen. Same hands up in the room. There are a few things we could discuss. I will structure the discussion if you want me to, but before I do that, I'm gonna open the floor in case anyone's got something burning they're already thinking or already wanted to say and didn't get to say last time around. So if you're in that category, throw a hand up, crew. Otherwise, I shall structure our discussion a little bit. I presume some of you came back because it was sufficiently motivational last time. I was trying to remember. I remember some of the discussion last time, and I can't remember where the threads that we started that we didn't finish. So if anyone can, they can help remind me. Let's have a look at the chat, because there's something. Oh, Emma's saying you can chuck some questions in the chat. So that's all good. You're welcome to do that. Yeah.
I'll kick off with one of the questions in the slides.
Do I need to give, for the purposes of people online, I'm assuming I need to hand the mic over to the person in the room. Hold on a sec. We'll get there. So we're just going to take one in the room to get us started, which might be about what would we like to see from future tipping points report, or what was missing.
I'm going to dive in the third one, actually.
Oh, you're going three. Good.
How should we be translating this work for a wider audience? And my question is, how have you already translated this work for a wider audience? Like what's already being done? Good.
Do you hear that online okay? Yeah, nodding. So how are we translating this work? What's already been done? Well, you have to think about what your audience is when you write a big report. And it's fair to say that when you're framing a report for the conference of the parties, you're framing it for what we loosely call policymakers, but with half an eye on business and civil society and other actors. So what did we do to translate for policymakers? Things like Manana in the core team working closely, excuse me, with the delegations, particularly the Brazil one. So they brought it into the negotiation process at the COP. Beyond that, Peter, that is Peter Lafort, might want to chip in because he has been doing a truckload of stuff, translating this stuff for we're working more in the, say, the business and NGO sector. And Peter, do you want to say anything about what you're doing on translation?
Yeah, sure. A few things. So more informally, getting a lot of invitations to talk to different groups, networks, organizations around this, and kind of testing bits of language and finding what resonates. A very sort of emergent process of translation, but more structured. I've also been running a community of practice around positive tipping points for the last year. So a group of about 10 or 11 of us, and we meet once a month for a year from different parts of the system, but very much interested in social change and social movements. And we're trying to co-design and then co-produce a toolkit that can be used to do really broad engagement around positive tipping points. So really encouraging sort of non-linear thinking and how these ideas might be put into practice. So we've been sort of learning from the academic context, but doing the co-production in a non-academic space to see what different language and different ideas emerge while the report is being written as well. And we're at a point now where we have a sort of an outline of a toolkit. So starting to now bring that back into the academic space and sort of see what can we use from the report, for example, to bolster that, and what else do we need to create separate from that process. So yeah, so it's an exciting moment where we're starting to do some testing on that with different audiences. Happy to talk about that in more detail at a later point with anyone who's interested.
Yeah, love that, Peter L. Thank you. It took me about 2 minutes to work out how to put you in front of everybody on the screen, but I've managed that as well. And there are broadly lots of other thoughts for translation in the form of like more targeted policy briefs or briefs for business or whatever. And we find that a lot of my inbox is full of all sorts of people who want more targeted information, and Peter L will say the same, I think, about this stuff. It's just then becomes a capacity issue, or what do you prioritize, and then how do you package this stuff? So yeah, brilliant.
Did you want to add anything?
That's good. That's good. Right. I've got lots of you. You're now on screen online. I've messed it up again. Hold on a sec. Change the view. Try to go back to gallery mode. So anyone else want to chip in with something good? Was a question possibly in the chat? I'm going to look at Chris. Chris, is that which I'm going to guess which Chris that is? Yeah, there he is. I'd like to dig deeper into the question of policy engagement. Good to see you are focusing globally. Do you want to verbalize anything more on that, Chris, before we pick up that one on policy?
I think I've said in the chat, and you've reproduced it spot on, just as part of the discussion, how we are going to influence on a global scale. You've given some ideas already, which is great. And particularly on this issue of identifying positive tipping points or super leverage points, as Systemic calls them, how we that may be the work that Tom and crew are doing. But just I'd love to hear more about how that process, and also to help, if I could, in my modest way, but just how those processes are going to go forward.
Good one. Okay. Yeah, Peter H, I'll switch to you next in a minute. Let me try and give Chris a half answer with help from the crew here if they want to chip in. So if we take a step back, what can policy do? Well, what does it do? It spends public money. That's a powerful thing, but it can also coordinate other actors, if you like business, other people who need to come to the party to make change. And policymakers could start coordinating between themselves. So part of our message, as Chris knows, is that the right coordination can bring forward the positive tipping points, and that's proven in some existing case studies. And in principle, you can take a step back and you can say, well, if these actors, these policy representatives, these nations or jurisdictions work together, then they're going to be more effective than if they work alone. So to answer the question about what we're doing, maybe Steve, you want to say a word on this, but we're doing a mixture of things. We're doing some mapping of where is everything at in each sector, as I said before. But the aim, I think, would be to then take that knowledge and stare at it in the light of what do we know about which kinds of policy interventions are, let's say, more powerful for triggering particular positive tipping points. And then which coalitions of actors could together like get a whole sector to a tipping point and everybody else would end up following. So I could give an example. It would probably be electric cars, where you probably don't need all of Europe, China and the US to ban petrol and diesel cars in 2035 for it to tip the whole global market, because between them they sell 60% of the cars anyway. It probably only needs one or two of those jurisdictions. Steve, do you want to say anything?
Do I need to stand up and-
You don't have to. You could use that mic. This is Steve Smith, who's lurking there. You probably see the top of his head on this shot, actually. But I can see.
Yeah, you might need sunglasses. Chris, it's a very good. I'm glad that you asked this question, you in particular, because I think in the next phase of where positive tipping points are going, we need good convening experts, brokers who can speak languages across disciplines and across industrial domains and economic domains. What we're hoping to do in the future with the positive tipping points work is go beyond just research and facilitate translation and convening of key actors. And as Tim mentioned, there are certain really great potential sectors that have a few important small numbers of key nodes in the across the supply chain, across the industry. And another example that we're working on at the moment is looking at land use in the Amazon, where, for example, in the soybean production system, there's only a few main brokers and a few main exporters and finance people who could really transform that particular system and help to avoid deforesting the Amazon. So beyond just the research on that and mapping those systems, which we're particularly good at in the university, we're interested in getting people to convene those key actors in government, in industry, in the export world, how to come up with at least a agreement in principle of how to actually implement and operationalize these positive tipping points beyond the research. So convening with people like yourself would be hugely interesting to see how we can collaborate on that.
Thanks, Steve. And I was just messing about there, testing my own stupidity and finding myself unable to simultaneously leave you on the screen and put prompt questions back up again. So we'll let Peter Horton come in, and then maybe we'll come to Jill with a good point in the chat. Peter H over in the Gers.
Hi, Tim, and hi, everybody. I'm first of all just like to say how impressed I am with the work that's happened since the very end of the Tipping Points Conference in 2022. And we had that little inaugural meeting and when Tim first floated the idea of doing this. And what you've done since then is absolutely astounding. Just from my point of view, because as some of you might know, I'm not an academic, I'm a performer and a writer, and I work on Gaia science, Gaia theory as such, and working on how to get some of the ideas behind Gaia to ordinary people. And it strikes me that maybe now is the time to look at, especially in terms of four positive tipping points, at creating a shared vision, a positive shared vision of how we would like to see the planet work. And obviously for me, that goes back to what Lovelock and Margulis say in their writings, which are full of social and cultural references, which we can use as direct quotes as a starting point, so that maybe we can have a little group who can agree on a vocabulary, a Gaia-based vocabulary, which we can roll out when we go to these things. Because as you said at the very beginning, business as usual just cannot be allowed to happen. But we've only got a business as usual vocabulary at the moment. We don't have anything other than advanced capitalism and stuff to talk in. Those are the only vocabulary. And what Tipping Points is doing is starting to create a new vocabulary. But I think it needs to really have a clear vision behind that, so that we can see this is what we're sharing, this is the positive stuff we're going for. So really, that's all I want to say. I'd be very happy in collaborating with people who would like to explore the Lovelock and Margulis, bits of Lovelock and Margulis, which talk about the social and cultural implications, and start working towards developing that shared vision of a positive future. That's it.
Love it, Pete. Thank you. Yeah, you kind of nailed what's going on underneath, at least in my head as well. The Tipping Points is like it seems to work as an entry point for many audiences into, instead of being disempowered by complexity and just going, oh my God, I'm just going to throw the towel in because there's so much, all this complicated stuff going on, and I can't, my little me, we can't possibly make a difference. There's all these other things that have got to line up, and oh my God, throw the towel in. Instead, wow, actually sometimes life does transform the planet. Tiny little microbes change the world, and sometimes that'll happen for us humans. And so you've nailed it. That's the underlying shift here, that embrace that worldview and have it empower action. Great. Don't know if that sparked anybody else, but that sounds awesome. Can I come, let's have a look around the room. I was going to come to Jill maybe, or voice some stuff that's, I'll give it a go, but Jill, you could voice it as well. But so Jill's got a lot in the chat. I have to
Okay, let's just say very briefly that preventing negative tipping points might be great as well. And some of them are political and very cultural, but maybe you talk to people in sort of psychosocial disciplines like Paul Hoggett of the CPA. And is there some kind of awareness, like Molly Scott Cato's work on preventing fascism, that can help think about preventing negative tipping points? And then I've thrown in a whole other spanner about social media you can think about if you want, but forget that for now.
Let's go back. Let's do social media in a minute. I think that one, let's stick on that, negative social tipping and how to avoid that. I mean, I think you're touching on, for me, this space of what the academics call the political economy of this, and issues of justice and injustice that can emerge. That's absolutely central, because of course we see some supposedly well-intentioned, say, policy actions that backfire spectacularly because they're not being very well thought out, and they're perceived as penalizing those who are disgruntled already or less well off in society, or whatever, whether that's Gilets Jaunes or whatever. So really, really interesting area. One that certainly we want to keep working on. I want to say one thing there, which I might be drifting off your question, but
never mind.
Bear with me for a sec, Jill. Because what I give, for good or ill, I'm giving a lot of talks about this stuff, and I can guarantee you every time I give a talk about this stuff, people will say, what about the batteries? What about the lithium or the cobalt that's got to be mined in Chile or Democratic Republic of Congo, or in respectively, for the batteries for the EVs and so on and so forth, which are both valid points. Basically, water for Chilean villages is being robbed by a lithium mine, and itinerant miners in the DRC are having a pretty risky time of it mining cobalt. These are clearly local social justice issues, but what we don't seem to regularly do in our narrative is remind everybody that 80% of the world lives in net fossil fuel importing countries and have everything to gain in getting off fossil fuels and getting on renewables, which are much more distributed source of power. And when you think about the world's inequities and the amount of concentration of wealth and power associated with fossil fuels, and you think it through for renewables, suddenly there's a huge amount of positive social justice consequences in the global sense of making the transformation. That's not to say that there won't be localized issues, but to go back to your negative climate tipping points, the fundamental point has to be millions or billions of people's lives on the line here. If we kept on business as usual and we kept going over the negative tipping points, the bodies will be piling up, in simple terms. And that, if you imagine some kind of scales of justice, for me, when I have those mental scales of justice, all of those bodies are on one side of the scales. And then we've got to weigh against that. Can I reduce the number of bodies on, I'm sorry, I'm putting this bluntly, on that side of the scales? Can we reduce that? Everything we can do to accelerate the change that reduces those bodies piling up is pretty good, but we've still got to avoid accelerating the change causing its own casualties. And that's the kind of it's a moral dilemma, perhaps. But for me, it's pretty obvious which way the scales are weighted, and that it becomes, the art form here is like threading through that space to make sure that you're not creating fresh injustices, but knowing that what you're trying to achieve overall could be very morally and ethically positively framed, because you're trying to avoid a massive gross injustice that is being perpetrated often on the poorest and in the world already. Well, if that makes any sense. Sorry, I may have gone off the question. Right, enough said. Too much said. We've got a few people in the room who want to chip in now, which is awesome. Josh is going to help. Thank you. Let's go to we're going to go to the back of the room. We're just going to canvass some more inputs and thoughts for now, and then I'll come back to the chat. Alessandra, I'll come to you, might come to you. You've got a good point online, and Hallie and a few more of putting chips in. But let's go to the room.
Thank you.
You could say who you are if you like.
Yeah.
The people online won't be able to see you, but
Apology when like checks. I'm most interested in food system change. But I just wondered, a bigger question: do you think efforts are better invested in sort of the developing economies leapfrogging, or trying to change or tip systems in established economies? So if you look at what's happening in Europe with the food system, that's one of the examples of right-wing populism, coming out in support of the farmers and turning that into a very political issue. Italy have banned cultured meat. France yesterday banned putting sausage labels on plant-based meat.
Yeah.
There's lots of signs, and lots of European countries, and apparently 4 EU countries ban cultured meat. That's it. No, we ban Europe. So I think there are signs that that sort of trying to get to a tipping, people bringing in policies to try and tip the food system in some established economies is backfiring. I mean, maybe there are other ways we can do that. So obviously there's a lot of work to do and limited resource. Do you think it's better to sort of focus on developing economies and trying to avoid them transitioning through the terrible diets and high consumption lifestyle or developed economies? What do you think? I mean, we need to do both, but where would you sort of start? Where would you focus efforts?
Well, it is a both and, as you say, Natalia. I think as a kind of as we try to build this little community, I hope that with enough of us that we can do the both and that there'll be a part of the research translation community that hopefully gets a growing Global South membership and voice, and Tom and others are trying, really working hard on that. At the same time, we started off with a sort of global north bias for various obvious reasons. So we're already, in a sense, switched on to things like substituting existing technologies for cleaner ones, and the possibilities or not of tipping points to reduce demand, where people are just basically over consuming in the global north. It's totally wasteful. And all the evidence says it's not making them any happier or having any other net benefits. And yet we can still be hugely, as you say, culturally resistant to change. So I suppose that's my honest answer. We'd like to do some both and. The amount of both and that we can do is obviously determined by the size and the skills and the makeup of the community we try to grow here. But we are working, in simple terms, we have a proposition, Rotate to Bezos Earth Fund, which they're supporting, which is we work towards a global network, and we'll have different hubs. So Exeter could be like the Europe hub or whatever. But the first other hub that we've been talking to about forming is a global South hub, you might call it. Maybe there'll be more than one of those, but to start with, we've got a mixture of African and South American friends, sort of passionate about working together. And then an Asia hub, I'm not sure it's the right label, by the way, but that's the direction we're trying to go. And so then my view would be, yeah, let the global South take the lead in the global South positive tipping points. The worst thing that you could do from the global North is tell the global South, how to what's best for them. Yeah. Okay, cool. Right. You're gonna voice some stuff. Emma might be about to voice some stuff from online. What are you gonna do?
No, not from online.
No?
Sorry, answer to Natalia.
Oh, you go. Emma's gonna respond to Natalia. Then I'm just gonna check the chat.
So
Did you say who you are, Emma, for everybody online?
I'm Emma Bailey. I have worked on this tipping points report, but my kind of answer is coming from my PhD work on directed shifts and food tipping points. And I worked with one of our lead authors on Professor Tim Lenton on the food chapter, and he organised a political economy conference around meat transformation, part of which was talking about developing nations and the kind of very damaging ideas of the global north on protein ladders and kind of what it means to be a developing nation through your food culture. And part of that conversation was around China, who's already seen some really massive changes in its meat consumption because it's trying to fit this kind of Western and global north ideal on like what a healthy diet looks like. So from the alternative protein side, which fits quite well into the tipping points narrative, there is maybe some potential to be talking about the kind of micro and macronutrients, the protein supply of proteins, and can this be a viable alternative for this kind of protein ladder? But then in a kind of more holistic sense, how do we deconstruct that protein ladder? And as Tim said, I think a lot of that is, those solutions should be coming from global South because we've already messed up for ourselves this trajectory of what it means to eat well. So yeah, I think it is an independent discussion where we redefine what it means to eat well for ourselves, while not pushing this narrative of, where beef is the best thing for your health, because it is the worst thing for the environment.
Nice. Okay. I've got another hand up in the room, but in the interest of sort of balance and keeping everyone engaged, I'm just going to switch to online first with Zoe. Zoe, it's quite long in the chat, but you've made a good point here. Zoe's question is really, are voters and future voters more effective influencers on policy than policymakers? ? I don't know if you wanted to just voice a bit more of that, Zoe. You're on the mute, sorry.
Hi. Yeah, so I mean, I just added another little comment actually in the chat. I asked Jason Hickel this morning for his thoughts on sort of resourcing universal basic services in the context of degrowth and the idea of sort of reining in wealth. And he actually sent me a link to a paper, but it seems to me like this question is really important to address, maybe particularly for policymakers. But I kind of worry that policymakers, that their job is to follow through on the direction that politicians want to go in, and or well, you might consider politicians and policymakers, I don't know, but in any case, then that's all coming and driven by voters and future voters. And so I think that one thing that's really brilliant is what's already been done in terms of making stuff accessible, in terms of Exeter and the GSI, in terms of MOOCs and the seminars going on YouTube and so on.
Thanks,
And
Zoe.
yeah, I do sometimes think that audio is a kind of untapped thing, because people are often, you know, they're cooking or they're cleaning or they're in their car, and there's an opportunity to get in people's heads through audio when they perhaps can't read, you know, don't have the time or the inclination to sit down and read a long report.
I think Steve, that's lovely. I think Steve down at the front in the room has got a cunning plan that he wants to do some positive tipping point podcasts, don't you, with the World Economic Forum? So I think you're hitting a good button there, Zoe.
Yeah, I do think podcasts are really good, because there's loads of podcasts about climate change, but they do tend to be they're often a kind of multifaceted. But what I haven't found is a really good podcast that just kind of explains the kind of the science or the mechanics or whatever. And it's really would, the more we can help people to grasp that, and loads is already done on that. But I just kind of feel like a dedicated thing to helping people to understand the physical world aspects of it would be, maybe I'm missing something. I don't know.
No, I like it. So the message is everything we can do to educate and communicate this stuff more clearly has considerable value. Yeah, I want to apologize to online because I wasn't reading the chat and realizing that you couldn't hear Emma. I've given Josh a different mic now, so shall we're going to turn to a question in the. Oh, do you want to have a response on this? No, it's all right. I'm going to go up to the back in the room. We're going to try a new mic. Just come off mic online and say I can't hear if you can't hear, but hopefully this one is going to work. Josh, you can. So I think they're getting that. They'll protest if they can't. Yeah, go for it.
Yeah, so I'm doing my undergraduate currently in bioeconomy, which is sustainable macro.
It's still not coming through online, I'm afraid.
Okay, thanks for letting us know, Peter. Well, at least people can hear me, but that's getting boring, isn't it? In the meantime, is there anyone online who wants to chip in? As at least we can hear you. It's fairer that way round. There's a load of great stuff online I can see in the chat. Put the mic like a lolly, exactly.
Well, we could just repeat your question.
Make the question quick and I'll repeat it.
Okay, so essentially my question is, which role does the financial system play when it comes to social treatment?
Oh, beautiful.
Because it's so fundamentally linked to how we evaluate things, but
Beautiful.
also to how like power dynamics work, but also for example time preference, and I think there's huge potential in how that could be changed, or yeah.
The question was basically what's the role of the financial system or the potential role in social tipping points, which is a brilliant question. And the questioner rightly pointed out they might be more part of the problem than part of the solution historically, but that doesn't mean they could be part of the solution now and in the future, and might increasingly be becoming so. But what does that take? For what it's worth, there's a section of the report on that which we wrote with friends from the sector, Daniel Godfrey in particular. Ash, who's in the room, we're also quite passionate about what's the architecture of climate finance that can actually work for everybody, which kind of means for the global south first and foremost. So yeah, brilliant question. Don't know if anyone wants to respond to that. Alessandra, I'm going to let you come in because I've seen your virtual hand go up online.
Yes, thank you. And actually, I was, even before I heard the question, I was going to refer to the banking system, and I'm sort of put the note on the fact that I think you would find helpful to connect with Triodos, and in particular the chief economist who has been talking about this degrowth and Triodos may be a relatively small institution, but it's a strong voice when it comes to sustainability. So, and I know them well because I am actually on the board of the UK entity, so happy to introduce you to the CEO and, as I said, the chief economist, but the language is absolutely the same. So I think you would find a very helpful partner in, how really the difference can be made. So that's my suggestion, and I stop here. Happy to follow up, separately.
That's a great offer, Alessandro. I've met someone, I think that's great. They came out of the Southwest from Embry, Triodos. I've met some of them, but we'd love that. That sounds great. Okay. Okay, so we've got a question down the front here. You could give it a try with the mic, but I will repeat the question for the online audience.
I don't know if people can hear me online, but I'm very concerned that I was looking at the question of what's going to be missing from the list that you had in the report. And it may be in the report, but it's going to be a complete dynamic shift in economies that will be required. But also I'm thinking of the mitigations, because in some cases we've already passed that tipping point. I'm thinking of sea level rise, areas that are particularly affected by global warming, food security. There's a whole range of really serious issues that we need to, as a globe, manage. But what we haven't done really is to have anything other than, and it was sort of mentioned by somebody else, almost a colonial perspective of the North telling the South how to live. And we're not giving them a particularly good model. But should we be funding that mitigation for what's already happened?
Very good. Okay. On the assumption that online didn't hear that, my summary of the brilliant question is we're not really socially collectively leveling with the magnitude of impacts that are starting to come from Earth system and climate tipping points, particularly, like sadly many aspects of climate change, they are disproportionately felt by the least well off, often or usually in the global South. So we need to address that injustice, and are the purported solutions we are offering, or whatever other framing you want to give to the global South, in fact wholly inadequate? Well, I love the question because we're super in agreement on it. Ash is also in the room live today. Suffice to say, kind of agree. And this is, I mentioned for COP29, it was really Ash's idea, but we really think that we need to unpack the reality of these cascading bad tipping points and not try to bring that, first of all, we've got to try to bring that home to people, the injustices that those will create, but then be practical about what does that demand in terms of loss and damage support, finance architecture, what can be adapted to, what can't. How do you then credibly raise the money in simple terms, or to redistribute the resource, to soften the blow, shall we say, to put it one way, for those that suffer, at the same time as hopefully empowering in a literal and metaphorical sense the global South to leapfrog fossil fuels to renewable energy, etc. Well, we've written a bit. Some of us have written a bit about that already, but I think that's a great question, because that's something we want to do more on in simple terms. And Ash, who's behind you, and we worked with not with Bezos Earth Fund support, but with Open Society Foundation support. We've worked on a little bit on this, and we want to do more. And as you said last night, Ash sent me a really useful link to an announcement that OSF and Bezos Earth Fund made, was it yesterday or last night, that they're going to put, what was it, $25 million towards the first stage of financing, broadly speaking, green energy projects in the global south. And their rationale stated, Ash was telling me this, is it's only the first 5% of financing that needs to be kind of secured or guaranteed to build confidence from other people holding capital to put more finance, de-risk their investment behind it in this case, broadly in empowering green energy revolution in the global south. So that doesn't address all the loss and damage stuff, but well, some of us are discussing it. We think that's really interesting and important.
Included in the next report.
Oh, yeah, we'd look absolutely. And what the simple answer is going to be, we're actually thinking of a targeted report for COP29, kind of on what you asked about. But if we're going to pull that off, we're going to need, we might be welcoming, you know, one or two more contributors. So if people are really motivated by those aspects we've just touched on, that pretty much summarized some of what we want to package for COP29, which will have to have a finance lens on it, because that's the way that COP this November is going to be framed. But really, the money is power, unfortunately, like it or not. So that's kind of important. Yeah, brilliant. 4:54 already. Natalie has got a question. Let me just online. I better rewind and check if I'm missing some other questions online. But Natalie, do you want to quickly voice your question, because it's on the financial stuff?
Sure. I guess because we were talking about financial sectors and their role in kind of tipping points earlier on, I think it would be interesting to think about whether there are patterns in financial markets that lead to sector or market transformation, and what the precursors are to, say, for example, investment and a flurry of investment going to a specific market or technology. What are the precursors to that? And whether or not that's something that could be replicated to trigger positive tipping points in other sectors. So whether that's state incentives or regulations, or insurers deciding they're going to underwrite risky investments in certain sectors, or just profitability or return on investment suddenly passing a threshold that then mainstream investment moves in and I guess sees it as less risky. So that could be quite an interesting area of research.
Yes, spot on. I'll just mention one thing that we're also doing, working with the Institute and Faculty of Actuaries, Sandy Trust and others. We did one report on the Emperor's New Climate Scenarios, which got a lot of coverage. We've got another one just about to go to press, Climate Scorpion, I think it's called, the sting in the tail of climate change. But for those who don't know, the actuaries are the people who work out the risk for the insurance and reinsurance sector. So everyone will listen to them, and they're risk professionals. So that impartial response to the question, Natalie, I think we've got a great opportunity to work more with them, with the risk professionals who can help, as you say, you know, just having insurers willing to insure some of these new projects, energy projects, whatever it is, that's a brilliant step. So it sounds like we might have we've got the beginnings. We already have probably had a little working group on this role of finance in the tipping point space, but it's sounding like there's a few of you who are quite interested in that. So we might take away from today, one of the things we might take away is just to add that little work stream and see if it grows a bit of momentum, because we have several friends who are actually in the finance sector who are really keen to discuss this. Awesome. All right, I've got one more in the room as the clock ticks. Do you want to?
Yeah, is that right? Have I got time?
Go for it.
Okay.
If you, I will relay to people online my short summary of the question.
Okay. It's just about the report. I was just wondering where the majority of engagement has come from, whether it's been private sector, public sector, NGOs, whether any institutions have like committed to any tangible change off the back of the report. And my second question, sorry, is do you have Mr. Bezos has read the paper? I have a cup of tea reading it.
So the first question was, where has most of the engagement with the report come from? I would have to defer to Andy or Garth if he were online, but he might not be because I've just got to scan the people online as regarding the data we have or don't have about who's engaging. I mean, we have all good question because it isn't always trivial to track that engagement. But we know where it is geographically. That's not answering your question completely. We get a sense of it from my inbox or other people's inboxes, but I'm not sure we're doing the best possible job, to be honest, tracking that engagement, possibly because of capacity issues. So I could ad lib a bit about my personal bias perspective on where the engagement, how this is landing, but it wouldn't be a fair total sample. Suffice to say, we've mentioned the finance sector. I've found that companies and businesses in general have got an appetite for the positive tipping point stuff. But finance has a particular appetite for it, and that does include insurance and the actuaries and everybody. In the governance space, the Brazil delegation absolutely loved this. So at the COP level, UNFCCC, we've got clear allies in Brazil, but also with the UN Secretary General Guterres. As you might have noticed, he is quite up on tipping points, as is John Kerry, the US climate envoy. Previous, now finished. Good. So we've got a sense of compatriots, but I can't give you a. So the second question is, has Jeff Bezos read it? I don't know is the answer, but I would have to ask Andrew Steer, who has read it, who's the head of the Bezos Earth Fund. We do know that Jeff's ex-wife, Mackenzie Scott, is quite interested in this, though, because she, interestingly, has reached out through a friend in Michigan, expressing an interest in the positive tipping point stuff. And she, if you are watching what's going on in the world, is been gifting quite large amounts of money with and trusting people to do good stuff. So you never know. Even if Jeff hasn't read it, maybe Mackenzie might have done. So, which is good. Anyway, we're at 16:59, 4:59. Am I duty bound to wrap us up, organisers, on the hour? Where are you?
Can I just ask a follow-up question from that one? Did you see more engagement on positive tipping points?
Natalia is asking whether we saw more engagement on the positive tipping points or the negative ones, and that I can answer. If it bleeds, it leads, as they say in the media. And if you look at the media coverage, which is not all the engagement we're interested in, but it's the one we can track the most effectively, their interest on the bad tipping points is, I'm afraid, way outweighs. It's not that there isn't interest in the positive tipping points, but in terms of what gets reported on the conventional media, it's the bad stuff that leads. When it comes to the social media engagement, and we had 8 million independent tweets and counting, I don't know the answer because I haven't looked at it, but it might be a little different. And if you were lamenting the fact that people would rather hear about the bad ones, take comfort from the thought that some very good journalists that I know well and work with are working really hard to try to bring the positive stories to light. It's just their editors. That's always the way in the media. And that is why others are starting to improvise new media channels and initiatives to communicate the positive stuff. So you can find myself on some of these because I'll always say yes to those invites. But yeah, great question. But maybe not a bad note to finish on, actually, because of course we do need to concern ourselves with the bad tipping points, as we've all been discussing, without that being a sort of cause for nihilism or despair, hence the counter message. And what we tried to do in the report, obviously, was bring that overall, I call it narrative arc, but bring both sides together so that we didn't all just go away and sort of commit suicide, put our heads in the sand, whatever, that we had, an empowering response to an otherwise alarming situation. And that's why we would quite like to continue to keep it all under one roof, basically. You work on both, but interested if that worked for you, audience. That's good. Hey, we've hit the hour. I don't think we're getting kicked out of the room here. So if there are that people might want to go, they might have only banked on an hour. Are there any more like burning questions or interjections before we wrap up? No, you're looking all right. Thank you. All right, then I'll say thank you so much for coming back, most of you, after the first session and carrying on engaging. You can tell that we've always got a plan, but it's never too strict. But we're basically, we've got little working groups or work streams or whatever on particular things that we think are priority foci, whatever the right plural is. And we've heard a bit about some of those. I think Andy or Candice or somebody in the chat could share to the attendee list a bit more of the detail of what those work streams are. I'm looking at this screen, hoping they're still online and listening to me, or someone's recorded this. But we'll try to follow through to share a bit more information about where we're at. But you heard a few of them, and I think some of you connected with a few of those things, like this climate justice, what we're going to do, tipping points and justice idea. So you can always reach out to the tipping points at exeter.ac.uk email address saying, I came along, I'm really interested in this, can you connect me with the right people? And we, mostly being, I think, Candice and Katja, bless them, will do their best with, bless them. And yeah, you heard me, we're excited that you're all here. We want to build momentum around this. We've got some momentum and we'd love your input. So thanks for coming along. Maybe we'll have another session at some point which might have a particular focus from today. I'm like thinking on my feet here, but I noticed a few things that kept coming up there that we might focus around to canvass those at your interest. Certainly that global South finance space, if we're going to do something for COP29, that's maybe top of the list in my head. So yeah, there we go. System governance, system justice and equity in the chat. Amen to that. So yeah, thanks for being excited about the report and about what we can continue to do together. And we'll, like I said, we'll carry on having some sessions, I think, and we want to engage you. So reach out and we'll join the dots and try and do that. Have a great rest of the day. Nice to see some of you joining internationally as well online. Ben, Peter H and others. Cool. Good.